Good morning and welcome to Sunday. I'm so glad to be here and I'm so glad that you are too. So let's see, back in North Carolina and we're actually here at our property just outside of Asheville and it's so beautiful. And I wanted to figure out how to be able to have meet with you this morning in this room where you could have a little bit of a view of where I am. So I'm glad that that worked out. This morning I want to talk about purpose and why we're here. This question used to come to me so often. It doesn't come to me nearly as much anymore because I feel very clear now for myself. But before I was clear about what we're all doing here, this question used to come to me regularly. What are we doing here? Really? And not only just what are we doing here, but what's my specific role and or purpose in being here? And I'm gonna guess that you probably have wondered the very same thing for yourself. And I know in my work with people these days, that question comes up regularly. Right? What am I doing here and what's the purpose? And I want to make a difference. I want to have an impact. I want to have an impact, but I also want to feel really good about my life, about myself. And, in all the years that I've helped people, which I'm going now, I think on just about almost 25 years. It's definitely over 20 years, coming up on 25 years. And even in all the work I did with clients as a therapist, the same themes would arise. And one of those themes was this lack of purpose and or wandering in their purpose and feeling unsure, right, of where they were at in life and what it all meant, essentially. And again, I'm generalizing 20 years of my work. But I worked with people at all different places in life. And so I worked with kids, I worked with adolescents, I worked with people of all the ages, but then also for a time period worked in addictions and severe mental health. So it was a very widespread, we'll say, just taking in of all of people's challenges and experiences that led them to have really hard days. And so there were a lot of very common themes, and certainly one of the biggest themes would come back around to feeling like they weren't significant, feeling like they didn't have a purpose, feeling like their life wasn't really valuable or important enough, which ultimately leads people to having their very worst days. Yes, it's life experiences, absolutely, but the thing that really clouds life experiences and or even sort of starts people down a path of a series of life experiences is not being fully grounded, not being fully rooted in, I am here for a purpose. I am here with great intention. And when somebody doesn't have that, naturally, there's going to be a lot of being blown around by the wind, down by the waves, whatever metaphor makes sense to you. And people are going to feel uncertain about themselves and about life. And when you feel uncertain about life and about your being here on earth, and you and your particular details of where you're at in life, feeling that level of uncertainty gets carried over into all the places of your life. So it will get carried over into just the way you show up, how you present yourself from day to day. So it will show up naturally at every stage of your life, right? Really starting in early childhood, going into teenage years and beyond, right? And so you carry it with you. And so if we sort of in our culture, we sort of talk about teenagers as finding their way already and really into your 20s. And now it's extending even further. But if you don't ever resolve that, right? If you don't ever come to a really clear answer to why you're here and why we're here, then you carry that into being 30 something, 40 something, 50 something, 60 something, right? And some people carry with them the whole entire span of their life an uncertainty of why they're here, an uncertainty of who they're meant to be in the world, who they're meant to be in their day-to-day life, how they're meant to show up. And so they end up accommodating, adjusting, people-pleasing, doing all of the things, right, that we know that are not good for us, but we end up doing them anyway. Why? Because it's our only answer. It's our only solution to what I'm doing here, right? When you're not rooted and grounded in knowing that there's a purpose for you and your unique, specific person, then we end up adjusting. We end up finding people in the world that we can be like, right? And we seek them out and we find them and we're like, yeah, I'm going to be like so-and-so. Or we find something in the world that we think we're meant to do, good at, able to do, whatever the thing is, and we seek after becoming just like that, right? Whether it's a profession or it's a person or it's a type of lifestyle, any of those is applicable, and we attach to that idea and then we attempt to emulate it and we move in that direction. So in some situations that can be good, right? Definitely following role models, having people that we're following is very helpful. But when you're not first rooted and grounded in you and you having a unique purpose, what ends up happening is we end up taking on the characteristics and or the lifestyle and or the details of this other thing, this other person, this other like lifestyle, this other way of going through the world. And it actually becomes really hard, right? And so when you think about life being really hard, that's, I would say, one of the top complaints or top comments that gets made that I hear, not as often now, but in my life previously, there was lots of conversation around how things were hard. I just don't attune to that anymore, so I don't hear it as often. But absolutely, we hear all the time, like life is hard, work is hard, marriage is hard, parenting is hard, the cold weather is hard, right? All these different types of things, these different roles, these different ways of being, that all of it gets deemed as hard. And so naturally, people over time assimilate into this notion or this path of life being hard and difficult. And so when life feels hard and difficult, of course, that doesn't feel good. It's not rich with being alive. It's not rich with desire. It's not rich with pleasure. In fact, it's all the opposite, right? It feels like obligation and shoulds and have-tos and my long list of to-dos and suffering and choices like, oh, I ended up in this job and it's not really good for me, or I don't really enjoy it, but there's this benefit and that benefit and I'm making good money and so I have to stay here. Or I don't feel like I have another option, right? I don't have a choice. I hear that regularly. Even among healthcare professionals and mental health professionals, there's this just very predominant view that they have no choice, right? And inside scoop, I used to be one of them. So I get it. Like, I so get it. And my heart really goes out to them. And I desire to help people in that space as well, to realize there is always more for you and you always have choices. It's a beautiful thing about life is that we do always have choices. And the only reason a person comes to this point where they think, I don't have any other choice, I have to stay in this marriage, in this relationship, in this job, in this situation, is because I have no other choices. And the reason we go down that path, right? And again, it takes like time, right? You certainly weren't born that way. And you certainly didn't dream about it as a child, falling into those types of circumstances and situations. Quite the opposite, right? As a child, like the whole world seems exciting and you're looking forward to it. But because life brings certain circumstances and we have certain models and certain teachers and certain trainers and certain coaches in early childhood, we end up learning how to navigate, how to do life in this very certain way that unfortunately is very threaded with themes around I'm not good enough and life is only able to give me so much and I have to go this way and I should do this and I have to make sure that I'm, good enough for this and I have to work really hard at that and I have to get married but like it's going to be really hard and so I'm not really looking forward to it and I have to have kids but that's going to be hard and I have to get a job but I have to just get a job to make some money so that like I can pay my bills. That actually feels terrible describing it to you in my body. How does it feel in your body right now as you're listening to it, right? How does that feel in your body to hear that story, to hear that journey? It feels hard and uncomfortable and sort of makes you want to like vomit, really. And so for most people, that is the track. And so we want to get off that track, right? And the reason I'm here with you, coming live and, plastering over social media is because I have found a new way to live. And I have a whole new energy and excitement for being alive and a whole new excitement about being myself, about being me and my purpose here on the planet. Now, I grew up knowing for sure I had a purpose. Growing up in the church and growing up with my parents, they were always very clear about having purpose and living a life of purpose. It was actually one of my mom's favorite quotes, that the point of life was to live a life of purpose. And so even if you got a lot of really good teaching and or a lot of good role modeling and you found yourself down this journey of it's hard and the shoulds and the obligations all sort of crowding in around you, feeling like the walls are closing in, I just want you to know I was there too. And the walls were closing in on me. And I could not see a way out of that darkness. And I got here. So I did find a way out. And it was through a series, right? Just like life being hard and all of the shoulds and obligations, it takes time, right? That was my life over the course of 38 years that progressively ended up in that place, in that mindset, in that identity of myself of I'm not a person who gets what I want. I'm not a person who has their life work out the way they want to. I'm not a person who is successful in a relationship, in a long-term loving relationship. I'm not a person that ends up in a job that they love, doing work that they love. All of those identities were who I became by the age of 38. And don't get me wrong, my life was really good, right? And that's the paradox is my life was really good from appearances, right? From the outward perspective, my life looked really good. And I was really not happy. I was really miserable inside. And so it's important for me to share that part of my journey because again, if you're there, I can help you. It's why I'm here. Because I know the level of pain, the level of hurt, the level of heartbreak and disappointment and self-doubt that closes in on you when you're in that space. And it feels like there are no choices and no way out. Even if, right, you had really good parents and you grew up with a really strong faith, even if everything looked like it should work out amazing for you, you can still end up in that place, right? And we know that so well from watching all kinds of people in the world who become really well known and famous and successful and still opt out of living at an early age. And so I share my personal story and my personal experience so that you know who I am. And in the last several years, I have learned a new way to live. And I've learned a new way to enjoy who I am, to discover the more of who I am, and literally fall in love with who I am, and fall in love with life. Now, that doesn't mean that life in the last several years has all been amazing and or without pain or hurt or heartbreak or suffering. Because yes, that is life. Like, life does have all of those elements in it, right? That is part of living the human story, living the human experience. And I no longer live in a miserable state. And that was where I got into at 38, inside of what I felt like was my purpose. Right? But my purpose had become something that was built, created inside of a hard life, inside of this perspective, this identity, this persona of life is hard, and therefore everything inside of life is also hard. And so while I was living in my purpose, it felt so hard. Because it was so hard, right? And I used to blame everyone else, not intentionally. I mean, yes, my parents I did blame intentionally, but everyone else, like, there would be blame to everyone else. I guess some of those people were definitely intentionally, like the place that I worked and various different details of my life, I did blame intentionally. I blamed with knowing, right? But I didn't know not to blame them. Let me put it that way. So I didn't know not to blame them. It made so much sense in my mind, like, yes, I got to be who I am because of certain people. I got to be where I am right now in my life because of certain people. And those people and what they did have made life really hard. And so here I am trying to live in my purpose, but it feels so hard and painful. And so part of the reason that it continued to be painful and hard is because I was blaming everybody else for it. Again, not fully being aware that there was another way to look at my situation, to look at my circumstances. And that was the shift that happened for me around 38 years old. I had this awakening, I had this awareness, I put myself in containers, the first container and then the second container and so forth, that allowed me to learn new information. Containers with people who were living life in a different way. Excuse me, containers of people who had a different lifestyle, who had a different outlook, who had a different understanding about life. So when you change your understanding about life, you change everything inside of your life. That's the really cool thing. So many people go about changing their life when it doesn't feel right or it feels hard. They go about changing their life by attacking one area of their life. Your marriage isn't working, you want to really work at the marriage and you want to put all the resources into the marriage. And or on the other person, right? We want the other person to change, and so we want to put all the resources into the other person. Or your job isn't working and you become very focused on your job not working and changing your job and being frustrated with your boss and your coworkers and the dynamics at work. But here's the thing. You only end up in those situations and in those places and in those challenges from the way that you see life as a whole. And so if you're perceiving life through this general lens of life is hard, then naturally you're going to find yourself in hard circumstances and hard situations, and you're going to solve for them from that strategy, from within that identity. that perspective of life, of being really hard. And insert whatever word you feel more comfortable with about your general outlook to life. And so what you can do instead, right, is actually change your perspective about life. Yeah. So it's actually a much smaller shift than going in and attacking all the things in one area of your life. Even if that is your health, right? Which is another thing that's constantly on a lot of people's minds, is their health, their physical body, their weight, some particular illness or struggle that's going on in the body. Again, if you're living inside of the lens, inside of the perspective, the identity of life is hard, therefore I will have hard experiences and it will feel like a struggle. So even times, right, when I got really sick years ago, my early 20s and then again in my early 30s, my mind went into panic and doubt and worry, and I became overwhelmed with all of those feelings, and I attacked the sickness, and I did tons and tons and tons of research about the sickness, but it was all through this identity of life is hard. And so because it was all through that identity and that outlook, I then did all the things that I then did to get healthy or to fix the illness happened through that lens. And so, of course, all the things, it felt hard. It took me to a place that was hard. It was another time in my life where I was severely unhappy. I was in so much physical pain. And there was so much disconnect between me and God. Inside of that place and inside of those times when I've gone into what I just call a miserable state, there's been so much disconnect between me and God. Like, God, why aren't you healing me? God, why aren't you allowing me, to have better things, for my life to be easier? At whatever place it was, whether it was in my first marriage, whether it was in my job, whether it was in my health, whether it was in how much money I was making, all of those scenarios, there would be this dynamic with God of like, why, right? Like, why am I having to struggle? Because I was, again, seeing God through the lens of life is hard, right? And so as we see the lens and as we see our identity as life is hard, therefore my life will be hard, then of course we're actually also perceiving God through that very same lens. And that was another place where I went wrong and where a lot of people go wrong, is they think that they can outthink their own limiting beliefs. This one really blew my socks off, as they say. The fact that I would have for years said, oh no, I don't look at God that way. God's amazing, right? And yet I would end up in these conversations with God about like, how come you're making my life so hard? How come, my marriage is so hard, or my job is so hard, or how come I've gotten sick? Like, how come I now feel like I might die, or, the future isn't positive and I'm going to have this big surgery, or whatever the pieces of it were. It also created this huge disconnect with God. And I found myself turning on life, turning on myself. So to think that if you happen to be a person that has a strong faith, you can't outthink your own limiting beliefs. It's just not how the brain works. That's not how we're wired as humans. And I want you to know that, because I didn't know that. And when I learned it, when I figured that out, when I saw that, when I was embracing of that shift and that new learning, it opened so many doors. And it allowed me to connect, to reconnect, and then connect with myself first at a whole new way, a whole new level. I was able to really appreciate who I was, who I am. And therefore, I was able to start to shift the way that I saw the world, the way that I saw other people, the way that I saw God. right? And so as I did the work on my own limiting beliefs, I was able to actually become greater than my limiting beliefs because I was actually able to transform them, to convert them, right? They changed appearance. They became something new and they became something much bigger, right? And so that is one of the most important things I want to offer to you this morning is you can't outrun your own limiting beliefs. You can't outthink your own limiting beliefs, and God gets brought in. God, the universe, your spiritual life gets brought in to your view and the lens in which you see the world. So let me speak real quickly to people who have been doing the work and are, immersed in some way in doing personal growth work and doing the inner work. And this is what I would say. In all of the work and all of the learnings that I've done and all of the many programs that I've been a part of and the many trainings, until I had someone who was really what I just call a very high caliber, in other words, somebody who was better than what I was able to do in my own work and in my work with people. Until I was working with somebody who was at that caliber, who could also really see into me, who could I met with him the very first time and he was able to give back to me from one conversation the struggles that I was going through almost better than I could articulate them. And that's how I knew I had found the next right person for me to be working with. And as I've worked with him, I've learned so much more about myself. And so I just want to offer to you, if you're immersed in one way or another, or you feel like, man, I've been doing the work, or I've done the work, or, you think you've kind of arrived, or you've gotten to a point where you shouldn't have to be working as hard. What I can tell you is I have been a person that consistently works hard. And again, right, even in the mindset of I've done the work, it's been hard, I've worked really hard and I shouldn't have to do more personal growth work, that actually doesn't align with life is amazing. Because that's actually over here, right? The opposite of life is really hard is not life is really easy, but life is amazing. And when you live in the lens of life is amazing and life is always growing and transforming and advancing, well then naturally your way of seeing the world and everything inside of it shifts. And so instead of thinking I've already done enough personal growth work, it's no, there's always more personal growth work available. As much as you want life to be amazing, it also requires you to come alongside. The path to having a more amazing life is going into your own internal world and doing those 2 millimeter shifts, right? Going out to the very big identities that you carry around with you, personas, if you want to call them, but just this getting into your identity and the way in which you've constructed your way of seeing the world and your beliefs of how the world runs. As you shift them, as you transform them, as you transmute them into life is amazing, well, then you realize the only way for life to be amazing in a restful way, in a way that isn't built on fear and anxiety and push and hard, has to be going from a place of ease and rest, which means you go internal and you change the way you see the world. And if in your mind you're hearing me be and your reaction to that is oh yeah, I know that, then let me just tell you, if you're not actively pursuing that, and you're not actively experiencing regular transformation happening with ease, happening in a flow, then you don't really know it. You know it intellectually, right? You know that's how things work intellectually, but you're not actually actively doing it. Because when you're actively doing it, then you speak from a place of knowing. Not just from a place of knowing. So if you're having thoughts I'm never going to be able to do my purpose, or I'm never going to feel like life is easy, or I'm never going to feel like walking in my purpose feels really good and amazing, which is literally the point of walking in your purpose. Walking in your purpose and doing life on purpose and having a job that ignites you and gets you excited and fills you up with energy and excitement, that isn't over here in really hard. People aren't like incredibly like passionate and excited and filled with excitement and pleasure at doing work when they live with the belief that life is really hard. So when you're over here and life is amazing, you actually can find opportunities and ways to shift your thinking in very small, subtle ways that are profound in your experience of how you then go about living your life. And that's my measure these days, right? For those of you that have been following me for years, you know I started out with Liberated Badass as my whole theme. I've kind of scaled back to Liberated. And also this just very simple, easy phrase, which is life is meant to be amazing. And so for me now, actually, I say and shout from the rooftops, life is amazing. Even when I experience circumstances that cause pain and hurt and sadness within me. Okay, but that's because I live over here in life is amazing. And so I see even those hard circumstances, those challenging circumstances, completely different now. That's why I say you can go in and attack and find a new job, or get divorced and find a new husband, or all those things. But the much easier way to go about changing and feeling better about any part of your life is to actually go inside and do the internal work to shift the way you view life in its entirety. Because when you shift the way you view life, you also shift the way you view yourself. You shift the way you view other people, the way you view God, universe, your higher power. You shift everything. And then you figure out, you create new ways to live. And you find that living in your purpose and living with purpose can be with ease and in the rest that you've heard about for so many years. Right? We hear this concept of life can feel rest. Life can be rest. Life can be easy. And for years that perplexed me. I grew up in the church and I heard that regularly. Grow up or live in the rest of God. And I'm like, what does that mean, really? Because I hear all these people talking about it. I hear sermons about it. And yet, when I get into one-on-one conversations with people, I hear all of this stuff that reminds me of how I was seeing life back then. That reminds me of life being hard. Things like, I'm so anxious, I'm so worried, I don't know what's going to happen, I don't have enough money, I don't know where the money's going to come from. Right? Like all of those thoughts. I am not really crazy about my job. I wish I could leave, but I can't. All of those thoughts, even from the mouths of people who were telling me, teaching me about the rest of God. Living in the rest of God, right? And so again, like, it's nobody's fault. There's no blame. There's no purpose. There's no benefit from blame. And everybody is literally doing the best they can. And I believe that at 100% now. All those people have helped me to move forward in my own journey. And so I'm actually immensely grateful for them. And I'm so immensely grateful for finding myself in a state of miserable several years ago to allow me to actually find the rest of God. And however those words work for you, the rest, living in belief with the universe, living in trust, living in knowing that life is working in your favor, which is now my favorite catchphrase. Life is always working in my favor. And I want the same for you, to be in that place of life is always working in my favor. And so I want to leave this with you, this part around if your purpose feels hard, if you're walking in your purpose feels hard, if your relationships right now feel hard, if your work feels hard, if you're in a space of like trying to create something new, or you've been working, certainly I know as an entrepreneur, there's all kinds of ups and downs and struggle inside of an entrepreneur lifestyle and business. And there's just the ebb and the flow of your emotional state, of your emotional, mental wellness, because life is so clearly about you and what your resourcefulness is and how you move forward, right? And so if you're trying to create a business and it feels so hard, or you're in your business and maybe you're 10 years into your business. I've met with several people who have been in their business for 5, 10, 15 years, and it feels so hard. And they haven't actually felt the benefit of working for yourself, because life is still so hard. And you're working all the time and you're not making the money you want to make. Wherever you are in your life, if you're having thoughts around like, is it ever going to get better? Or I don't know if I'm cut out for this, or I don't know if I can get myself to do the things that I need to do. Again, you're coming at it from a perspective that isn't deeply rooted in life is amazing. And life has very clear order to it. There is a very clear purpose to it. There is a very clear purpose for your life. Then you need to make that shift. You must make that shift in order to get over to here where you actually want to be living. And so a couple things, life and its order, right? We're here with great divine purpose. And so the other thing that comes to mind to share with you is if you grew up in a mindset, or you've been taught a mindset, or you look out there in the world these days and you're watching the news and your mindset is the world is going to hell, right? Or some version of this world is definitely not getting better, then it's going to be very perplexing for you to consider life is always working in your favor. And so I want to offer to you, you need that shift. You must make that shift if you want to live in a beautiful state. If you want to live in that liberated life, that's what I call the beautiful state now for myself. It's liberated living. And if you want to be in the beautiful state, if you want to be in the living that feels amazing, you have to go in. You must go inside and make that shift to be able to believe at your core that life is amazing, that life is working for you, and that life will go on, right? God didn't make some big mistake in his plans for the earth, and his greater plan for where things are going, right? I don't know what they look like, and I don't know the exact steps forward, but I know he didn't make a mistake. And I know he's not like, he wouldn't, like the bigger picture of like, where is life heading? There's no place for life is headed nowhere good. Let me just summarize it with that statement. And so if you find yourself with those thoughts, again, you must make a shift in order to live a more beautiful life. And it doesn't have to be this like, No, it's a small shift to the way in which you see the world, the way in which you see yourself. So let me summarize with this too. So again, if you're one of those people and you've done the work, or you've been in the work and you feel like, oh, I only needed to do this much, or that's a general thought actually. When I talk with people who are like, oh yeah, I know that. I'm like, I know you. Because I used to be you, and I used to say, oh yeah, I know that. Oh yeah, I know that. But you don't. Like in love, you don't. Because if you did, you'd be living it. And that really is the difference. And so while you may know it, you have growth. You have like more that you get to work through so that you can actually know it in your day-to-day life. You can know it in your living of life. And be able to have another perspective that working with a coach, a mentor, a guide is an amazing blessing. It's a gift. You get to do life with another human in partnership. That's a gift. That's amazing. Nobody wants to be alone. In fact, it's one of the main things that people run from and twist and contort themselves in all kinds of ways to avoid being alone. And when you hire someone to actually coach you, to help you with life, to help you figure out how to get over here to the amazing and keep creating more amazing, potentially for the rest of your life, that's a gift. It's an amazing, freeing gift that I literally didn't know was possible previous to 38 years old. I didn't know that was even a thing. So let me offer that to you also as hope. It's an amazing thing. It's part of what is over here in living an amazing life. So for you to live in your purpose with ease and excitement and energy, and I can do this, and it is working, and it's amazing, requires you to do the internal work, to make the shifts that allow you to hold beliefs, to have thoughts, to have feelings that all support that state of living, that outlook on living, that identity about who you are, is that you're a person that's completely capable, that you're a person who gets exactly what you want, that you're a person who's capable of achieving exactly what you desire. When you become firmly rooted in those beliefs, in that identity, that version of yourself, life happens for you, and it is amazing. So let nothing deter you from making that happen. It's willing to go. It's worth going all in, whatever the cost, to allowing that to be your life. Okay, you guys, as always, thank you so much for joining me here. Thank you for spending time with me, for raising your own standard of your life, for stepping up, for seeing, wow, yes, I want my life to be amazing. Help me figure out how to do that. It's completely possible for you. Again, I didn't know it was possible, and I had been a therapist for 15 plus years, and I had grown up in the church, grew up with great parents, and I still got to a place where I didn't know it was possible, and I didn't know the resources that were available. And so that's why I'm here. It's why I do what I do. It's why I love what I do. And I will drop a link here in the post for you to be able to set up a time to meet with me, to talk with me, and for me to hear more about what's going on with you, what you want in your life, and how I can help you make it happen. And I look forward to that time with you. All right, you guys, from between now and when I see you next, go do that thing you most want to be doing. And I'll talk to you soon.